and thanks for watching. I'm Susan Cheka-Lusignan, Director of Marketing and Program Development for the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. FFRPL is the 501c3 charity that raises funds, presents programs, supports special projects, helps to create specialized spaces, and purchases supplemental materials and equipment for the Rochester Public Library. Learn more at ffrpl.org. We are delighted to present this installment of the virtual version of our Fall 2020 Books Sandwiched In series of book reviews. As many of you know, Books Sandwiched In has been running continuously since 1956. We'd like to thank all of our reviewers who are participating remotely this season, and we look forward to welcoming everyone back to the library when it is safe and healthy for staff, reviewers, and the public. Our fall BSI roster focuses on diversity and inclusion. Today's presentation will be a review of Sunny Days, the Children's Television Revolution That Changed America by David Camp. This nostalgic look back at 1970s television outlines how the media transformed American childhood, simultaneously entertaining kids and teaching them about critical issues like diversity and feminism. Our presenter is Kara Rager, Manager of Educational Training and Family Engagement at WXXI. In her role at WXXI, Kara develops formal and informal trainings, events, resources, and other engagement opportunities for parents, families, educators, and the community, focused on infusing learning opportunities into everyday experiences. Kara has a Master of Science in Literacy Education from the University of Rochester and a Bachelor of Science in Elementary Education and Math Science Technology Education from St. John Fisher College. Kara says she is motivated by social justice, family engagement, informal and non-traditional learning spaces, community empowerment, and the power of collaboration.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kara Rager. I'm the Manager of Educational Training and Family Engagement at WXXI, our local PBS and NPR station. I am here with you today to talk about a topic and a book near and dear to my heart called Sunny Days by David Camp. And I just want to say a big thank you to the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library for asking us to participate in this book talk. This is something that, like I said, is very dear to my heart. As you can see, I'm wearing my Sesame Street 50th anniversary shirt. I have a few Sesame Street friends behind me to cheer me on. But one of the things that I noticed right away from this book, before we even start, is that the subtitle is The Children's Television Revolution That Changed America. And I think that's so powerful in its own statement, just the way it is, because really Sesame Street created a model that both Sesame still uses, as well as PBS and public media in general. So, you know, when we look back at this creation of such an iconic series and the other children's programs that kind of came from this revolution, you can really see the growth and the importance of what we do today. How, for me, when I read this book, I kept seeing all the things that we still do, all the best practices. All the strategies that we were able to gain from Joan Gaines Cooney's work, all the creativity and educator mindedness that Children's Television Workshop used to develop this series. Everything from, you know, working with legislators to find ways to fund this series, as well as, you know, data and evaluation and assessment, and how important that is in our creation of content and our supporting children and families. So that is something that I kept writing. I wrote in my book because I wanted to take notes, but that is something that I definitely, as I read this, kept going, oh, we still do that. So I do want to talk a little bit about the book because it was so great. I feel bad when you can't see cute Big Bird at the bottom. I love this book because it gave such a good timeline of what happened leading up to the start of Sesame Street, as well as other children's programs that were developed around the same time or afterwards, using, like I said, some of the same ideas or mission, or tried to recreate it and couldn't. You know, I think that's really exciting. So I'm going to talk about the book, but I'm also going to share some ideas of things that when Sesame, for example, talks about their mission and their goals, I will tell you a little bit about that. I'd also like to share a bit about the work that we do at our station related to, engaging young children and families. That is my role here at WXXI, is to take all these amazing PBS Kids and public media programs that are created for children and family use, and find ways to create opportunities for children, families, daycares, educators, libraries to use these resources in a way that feels exciting and meaningful, and being creative with them. And a lot of times that means not on a screen. So, creating an in-person opportunity with hands-on activities, is the goal of these series, is to create content that children can then run with, that they can learn anywhere with, whether it's actually sitting down and watching an episode with their family, or if it's pretending to be Abby Cadabby outside, making a nature wand and running around in a field. The idea is that we're empowering children, we're empowering families with content that is rich and is authentic and has language and playfulness and creativity and actual meat, educational learning goals that can be taken away too. And those are things that make our content very different than commercial media content. So that's a big takeaway too. If you didn't know the difference between children's programming in the public media world versus the commercial world, there's a significant difference. One of the things that struck me from the beginning, when in the book at least, when they were talking about the creation of the children's television workshop and the creation of Sesame Street, was how important the data was. And that's something that still is really important to public media as a whole, but especially around engaging children and families. I loved learning about how Joan Gantz Cooney drove around the country and worked with all these different individuals to interview early childhood educators and families and ask about, what would be helpful and what's missing, or why aren't you attending preschool? Is there access to preschool? All of this information that she was able to gain ahead of the creation of this series really helped inform her and her team on what to do and what to create and what was needed. And that's something that in the PBS Kids world and in the Sesame Street world currently, that is a big component. They're not just creating content just to create content. It's not just cute animated characters or fuzzy creatures just to be there. They mean something, and they are created to fill a need that families and educators might have. Sesame Street does this also specifically with an initiative called Sesame Street in Communities. And it was developed out of a set of toolkits, physical toolkits that Sesame used to distribute and still does to an extent, on topics that were really difficult for families to go through. So the first one that pops into my mind is called When Families Grieve. And it was a set of tools created specifically for families with young children to talk about death and to talk about the grieving process and to find ways in amongst those dark spaces to have conversations with kids, or to find ways to which language to use, or what kinds of activities could be used to help children feel their feelings, help the grown-ups feel their feelings too. And so Sesame Street has built out this catalog of resources on difficult topics, and as well as outside of the difficult topic areas, topics that just help arm their grown-ups with more confidence and more resources. I always say it's adding to your tool bag or your backpack. If you are not a science lover, finding a way to encourage science experiences with your young children could be really difficult. So having a character like Cookie Monster or Big Bird get into a science exploration activity really could help motivate a child or a family to go, hey, I think we could do that. They're going on a leaf color hunt. We could do that too. And so these resources are really developed with families in mind, and with child care providers in mind, with educators in mind, that they could be used in a variety of settings, which I think is really important too. And so the topics range from really tough topics that families may really struggle with, including substance abuse, including homelessness, all the way to creating playful experiences at home. And I think that really speaks to the growth of Sesame Street over the past 50 plus years, has been that they've created this really beautiful model as a television series, and then been really thoughtful to still go, having their finger on the pulse and seeing that families need more and can use these characters to support bigger feelings and bigger experiences that might be really hard for families to go through or educators to explore in their classrooms. Um, I see that with regard to the content that's been created very recently to help families with young children understand this topic and these conversations around race and racism to really, explore and dive into the fact that kids are seeing and hearing what's going on in our local communities and probably not fully understanding or understanding components, but having some additional resources to know the grown-up can lean on to have these conversations with their kids just speaks to me in big volume that Sesame is listening to what families are craving and needing and finding ways to support families in that fashion by creating content with new characters or creating new storylines and being mindful of what is needed for a family. The other component of this that I loved that they talked about in this book was the difference between Sesame Street and a series like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I grew up watching both, and I think that they both are beautiful in their own right, but very different. So one creates more focused learning on like your letters and your numbers and songs, and it's colorful and bright and a little speedy in their actions. And then Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was calm and slow and loving and caring and felt like a big hug every time you got together. But both are needed. And so that's one of the really great things that I think the book explored too is how different they can be and yet still be so powerful for a family or for a child. I really loved that connection. And I loved learning about the series that I may not have grown up watching, but hearing about how there were children's programs that were created to try to mimic what Sesame was doing, but that they either didn't get that far or didn't put in all the work. And so they didn't have as much powerful impact, I guess. That was really fascinating to me too. Because I'm an educator, I do want to share with you, Sesame has 5 brand attributes that they talk about when they talk about how they create Muppets, how they create storylines, what they keep in mind while they are developing content. And they are these 5 right here. They create real, heartfelt, simple, furry, and funny. And that's important because you can, if you take a second and you think about those 5 things, you can kind of see, if you've ever watched an episode of Sesame Street, even if it was a long time ago, you can kind of see these 5 big pillars in their work. And so real being the whole premise of this series, the look of it was supposed to look like anyone's neighborhood. It wasn't supposed to be shiny or pretend like. It was supposed to look like a place that you either where you live or where you have driven by or that kind of looks like your neighbor's home or your neighbor's area. The idea was that it was supposed to look real because it gave kids a grounding. It gave families a grounding to look at this place and watch it evolve and watch it change and watch the beauty in a place that maybe didn't look like very much from the outside, but there was so much energy and so much creativity and love. So that's their realness, and you see that in the real people that are added to the program, as well as the physical spaces that are there too. Obviously, heartfelt is a big component for Sesame Street. The whole point was to show a community, a group of people and Muppets that loved each other and loved their friends who were across the screen. And I think if you watched Sesame Street or watch it with your kids or your grandkids or you yourself watched, you felt that love. You felt that heartfelt warmth that came from those characters because you felt included. It's very simple. That was one of the things in the book, even like all the research and all the data and all the planning, that's the hard part. That's the work that goes in. And then the package that we see on television, it's simple. There are songs, it's entertaining, it's silly, it's funny, but it's a very simple model, right? And I think that simplicity is what draws kids in too, because it's not overcomplicating. It's furry. It's real furry. All these characters, they're furry. And that's on purpose, right? Something about like a stuffed animal or the fuzziness of your pet, it's warmth. It makes you feel loved and it makes you want to hug it. And that is something that I don't think Sesame takes lightly either. Like that's on purpose. This fuzziness, this furriness of the Muppets really does make you, the textures end up really attaching to those who think sensory wise. That you just feel like the warmth that comes from that fur and those feathers. And it's funny. It can't not be funny. And I think, really focusing on the humor in everyday things, the silliness in learning, the playfulness in the real world helps a child feel seen, especially in their early childhood years, and helps families see the lightheartedness in experiences. Um, and so I appreciate the modeling of funniness, of humor in Sesame Street too, because I really think it takes it to the next level. Your kids are starting to see jokes, they're starting to see goofy characters. I know for me, Grover is my favorite Muppet, so he is the zany one. He's kind of silly. Uh, Someone like me who's a little klutzy, that just made it feel like, oh, I'm okay. I had a little trip here and I'm all right. Because Grover always just bounced right back and he just stuck to it. So I love that they all kind of have their own little like zany personalities, but that there's this really great element of humor throughout. That you were also able to learn from the program and have a fun experience. Um, so I think that's our last one. Yeah, so I did want to mention to you guys too that this original research that we talked about before that's mentioned in the book by Joan Gantz Cooney, called The Potential Uses of Television in Preschool Education. You can actually read that. It's available at the Joan Gantz Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop for free. You can download it and read through her original report and findings to see what she found in her driving around the country, which is really exciting. And Sesame Workshop actually did a revisit recently, on kind of expanding this idea instead of it being very focused on television, but revisiting the potential uses of media in children's education. So that one's not by Joan Gantz Cooney. One of the researchers at Sesame Workshop did that revisit, but you can read both of those at the Joan Gantz Cooney Center website, which I love. I love that you can take something from a book like this and do a little bit more digging. It makes me feel like I can learn even more about a topic that I might be interested in. And speaking of that, I did want to share too that these are some books that I have read that I think are really good companion pieces to this Sunny Days book. It'll help expand the idea of where Sesame sits in the children's television world, as well as learning a little bit more about the creators and the actors and the public media partners. So there's the Life and Work of Fred Rogers is a beautiful book, learning a lot about Mr. Rogers' neighborhood and who Fred Rogers was. And it'll be a nice companion, I think, to the Sunny Days book, because they're very different in their series creation and like the mentality behind it. So very good book. And then The Street Gang, The Complete History of Sesame Street, which I'm sure will be very interesting to compare this book to that book. So I highly recommend if you read that to let us know what the differences are or maybe the similarities. One of my favorite books that I've read in a very long time was this Jim Henson biography by Brian Jane Jones. And I love Jim Henson. Like I said, I grew up with Sesame Street, also the Muppets and Fraggle Rock. But I loved learning about where he came from and how the Muppets got their start, and eventually how there was a split with, from creation of Muppets that ended up on Sesame Street to Muppets that are owned by Disney. So really great information on Jim Henson there too. And then not most recently, but the last one on here is Becoming Maria, and it's called Love and Chaos in the South Bronx, and it's by Sonia Manzano, who played Maria on Sesame Street. And what a great background information on her and her life story that she brought with her to Sesame Street too. So it's always nice to have extension resources to think about after the fact, and to add to your to read book list. I know I have one of those that's super long, so I wanted to share a few extras that you could add to yours. The other couple of things that as I was reading this, I just kept thinking, oh, this makes me so excited to re-listen to a few things or to rewatch. And I wanted to share these couple of resources too, because I really think that, again, if this is something that is near and dear to your heart and you want to dig into a little bit more, there are a couple other media forms that you can play into aside from reading a couple more books. But there is a really wonderful podcast called Finding Fred, and it's all about the impact of Mr. Rogers and, comparing some of the work that he did then to things that are going on now. It's really great. And if you love Fred Rogers, you'll, as an adult, just bring your tissues because it's a good one. um, and then there's a beautiful documentary called I Am Big Bird about Carol Spinney and his work creating and developing and growing Big Bird into the beautiful character that he is. So a great documentary, highly recommend watching because it's another one. Bring your tissues. It's a really good one. And then on my to read list is this book called The Wisdom of Big Bird, Lessons from a Life in Feathers. So that's really, we think of Carol Spinney and he was Big Bird for so many years, but he also was Oscar the Grouch. And I'm excited to read this book too because he has that dual personality sense. Because Oscar was such a grumpy Gus, and Big Bird is such a inquisitive, bright spirit. I'd love to see how he was able to switch between the two. So those are a couple of my suggestion extension resources because I just, again, the teacher in me wants to make sure you have more that you can learn from this beautiful book. And again, I took a lot of notes in mine. I don't know if you're a note taker in your book, but in the beginning, I started highlighting things that I wanted to share with you, but then there was too many. There were too many quotes. There were too many things that I wanted to keep jumping back into. So if you look through my book, you'll see lots of highlighting and lots of note taking, but it's because I loved it so much. So if you have people in your life that grew up watching Sesame Street or are educators now or are working with young children in some capacity, they would love this book too. So kudos to David Camp because this was a great one. And, when we think about how, what happens after you read a book like this, if you're interested in learning more about the work that happens at public media stations, especially like, for example, WXXI, we have a great website that has a lot amount of content on it, resources for families, resources for educators, professional development, events in the community. Those are all things that you can find at your local PBS station. But also, if you're really interested in the Sesame Street side of it, I would recommend taking a peek at the Sesame Workshop website, as well as the Joan Gans Cooney Center website too, because that has a lot of the current data and research that's happening with regard to families and digital media, educators, and education use of Sesame Street tools. So lots of great places to extend your learning on this topic. But again, I just want to say thank you so much to the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library for inviting us and me to participate in this great book talk. I hope you learned some interesting things about these furry feathered friends that we have, thankfully still in our lives after 50 years. It'll be 51 years in November. And if you have any questions or want to learn anything more, I am available through WXXI. So hope to see you out there when we can all get back together. Hope to see you at a community event. And thanks for being a PBS kid with me.